Hey, welcome. I have like 10 minutes before I have to go to another Zoom meeting. So I was at this beautiful place and I was going to show you the ocean from up here and read the rest of chapter 1 in Maurice Nicoll's book, The New Man. So let's see if I can turn this around. All right, we left off where it says, stone represents the most external and literal form of esoteric truth. It represents esoteric truth in its most inflexible sense. The commandments were written on tables of stone. It must be understood that truth about a higher evolution must rest upon a firm basis for those incapable of seeing any deeper meaning. Let us take briefly the extraordinary story of the Tower of Babel, recorded in Genesis. The ideas centered in this story refer to man trying by his ordinary knowledge to reach a higher level of development. This is the meaning of the tower that was built by man. But from what has been said so far, it can be realized that to reach a higher level for a man, personally, or for mankind, the teaching of the knowledge necessary for this further step must be known and be followed. Man cannot add to his stature by taking thought, by just thinking about it, that his own ideas, his own thoughts, cannot bring him up to a new level of evolution. He must submit to a teaching. His efforts must be based on this truth that we are studying. And this special knowledge or esoteric truth at its lowest level of comprehending is called stone. We shall see what the Tower of Babel was built of in regard to this necessary knowledge called truth. It was not stone, and it is expressly said that it was not so. That is, it did not come from a higher level of man, from those who have become new men. The story of the Tower of Babel is very strange and has little meaning if we take it literally. Well, this is his opinion. It doesn't matter. This is awesome, though. Let's just keep hearing. He's speaking as a psychologist and as the inner development. Whether people actually try this or not, literally, doesn't matter. Okay, it begins by saying that once upon a time, after the days of Noah and the ark, all the people had a common language, and the whole earth was of one language and one speech, Genesis 11:1. Then it is said that they journeyed from the east, i.e. away from truth, and came to a plain and began to think of building a tower to reach to heaven. Notice how the account continues. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city, and a tower whose top may reach into the heavens, and let us make us a name. Notice that they traveled from the east, and they had brick, a man-made thing, and not stone. The east represents, in the ancient language of parables, the source of esoteric truth. They reached a plane, that is, came down from a higher level, and then began to think that they could of themselves do something apart from what knowledge of truth they had gained from the East, quote from the East. So they began to build a tower. That is, they thought that they could, out of their own ideas and thoughts, reach to the highest level, here called heaven, and also called similarly in the gospel language, heaven. It means a higher level of man, and earth means an ordinary man, the natural man. They began to build for themselves, but notice that it is expressly said that they not only had bricks for stone, but slime for mortar. A higher level cannot be understood by a lower level. A man on a higher level cannot be understood by a man on a lower level. Man as he is cannot reach a higher level unless he comes into possession of the knowledge called truth that can lead him to it. So the tower was a failure. And then in the strange way in which this ancient language puts things, it looks as if, quote, God scattered them out of jealousy. But one must look deeper to understand this language. Man was at fault, not God. Man tried to raise himself by his own knowledge, called here brick and slime, and so was shattered. And the whole earth was of one language and one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain. He's reading from Genesis 1 in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there, and they said to one another, Go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they began to do, and now nothing will be restrained for them which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of the earth, all the earth, and left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. Genesis 11, 1-9. But it's very difficult to understand the ancient language if we take it literally. We can understand that if an engineer makes some part of an engine that is wrongly measured or of the wrong material, his engine will be no good. He may say it is God's fault. It is not God punishing. It is a wrong request, and so the response will not be as he hoped. The response will be according to the quality of his request. This is a very important concept. Anyway, and this is, quote, God, if you like, or the universe, that science studies. A wrong request leads to a wrong response. It is not really a wrong response, but an exactly right response in view of the request. The parable of the Tower of Babel is an illustration of this. Man made a tower out of brick and slime in place of stone and mortar. And, quote, God said, that is, response to the request said, this cannot be, in so many words. Now let us look at the other examples of stone as a term meaning in the ancient language truth about a higher development. To reach a higher state of himself, a man must request rightly, and for this to come about, a man must know what to ask for. Christ says, ask, and ye shall receive. But unless we know something about either the stone or the water of esoteric knowledge, how can we know what to ask for? Christ is not speaking about asking for life things, but about asking for help in inner evolution and understanding. Certain requests are made in the Lord's Prayer, and they ask Jesus, show us how to pray. Oh, that's beautiful. Anyway, in the Lord's Prayer, they are about right asking. That's in the Lord's Prayer. It's profound meaning in that prayer that Jesus gave us. It's a deep, mysterious truths are in that. Okay, so they are about right asking, but we will study this later. Now let us take the strange incidents of Christ renaming Simon. Simon means a hearing, like Hearing, hearing. But Christ renamed Simon Peter, which in the Greek is stone. Christ, of course, represents this truth of which we are speaking. He called himself the truth. He spoke of a high level of evolution for each individual man. He taught the means of attaining it. He taught rebirth. Now, in naming Simon as Peter, he referred to the literal aspect of his teaching. Christ said to Simon, Thou art Peter, and upon this stone I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 16, 18-19. Simon Peter was given the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Heaven means psychologically this higher level of development, intrinsically possible for man. But Christ only gave Peter as the stone the keys. The commandments written on stone are keys also. But literally taken, they are not enough. They open into psychological meaning. They contain great internal meaning. Esoteric truth in the form of stone is not flexible enough to lead to any real inner development. It must be understood, not merely followed blindly. In Genesis, it is said that Jacob rolled away the stone from the well. The stone in the mouth of the well means, in the ancient language, that literal truth blocks a psychological understanding of it. The stone was rolled back and the flock watered, for water is the psychological understanding of literal esoteric truth called stone. Just listen to what he says here, and then you'll understand what I was just reading. In this way can the following passage be understood. Then Jacob went on his journey. This is quote, and Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the children of the east. And he looked, and behold, a well in the field, and lo, 3 socks of sheep lying there by it. For out of that well they watered the flock, and the stone upon the well's mouth was great. And thither were all the flocks gathered. And they rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the sheep. That's Genesis 29, 1-3. When a stone blocks the well, it means that people have taken esoteric truth literally in the sense of the words only. They prefer rituals and so on. They literally do not kill, but see no reason why they should not murder people in their hearts, Christ himself, who represented esoteric truth, or the quote, the way, or the word, the logos, was called the stone which the builders rejected. The psalmist says, "The stone which the builders rejected is become the head of the corner." This is a strange phrase. Who are the builders? The builders of what? Of this world? Certainly Christ's teaching came into a world built of violence, a world in which everyone believed that violence leads to something better. But when Christ is called the stone, it means that fundamentally he was so. His whole teaching, however, was to transform stone into water and finally water into wine. Oh, like my bracelet again. The Jews understood everything literally as stone. Not just some of the Pharisees, Jews, not all of the Jews, because the Essenes were Jews as well. Christ transformed literal into psychological meaning. This is shown in one of the miracles, which are really psychological miracles. That is, the transformation of literal meaning into psychological understanding. Of course, again, I said in the last video, you can watch the last video because I talked about how Christ could manifest anything he wanted. So his first miracle of turning water into wine at a wedding could have actually happened. There are mystics that say they have seen this. Just a big statement for me to go into trying to explain, but I'm saying it would also happen so that we could see this deep inner psychological truth too. But a man who is bound down to the literal meaning of higher truth can destroy himself. This explains perhaps why some religious people seem to be destroyed by their contact with religion and made worse than life would normally just make them. This is possibly shown in the account in the 5th chapter of Mark of the man with an unclean spirit who came out of the tombs, of whom it was said that he was always cutting himself with stones. Stones, that is, taking higher truth at a literal level, cut him and made him unclean. And since Jesus represented, let us say at present, a higher understanding of literal truth, the man cried out unto him, "What have I to do with thee, Jesus?" And Jesus said, "Come forth, thou unclean spirit, out of the man." The man means the man to understanding, which is the real man. But this is only a slight glimpse of the meaning of this miracle parable. It refers to a certain state of a man in regard to higher teaching. The point here is that the man cut himself with stones. That is, he took higher truth literally and was therefore unclean. And his uncleanness had to pass into the swine. But perhaps we shall be able to understand something more of what this means later on. All right, I don't have time to finish this right now. Maybe I will down the mountain after my Zoom meeting. All right, I wish you guys so much love. I'll continue. Even the best fault. Okay. So where we were, it says the higher truth literally and was therefore. That's in the middle of a sentence, but let's see where the sentence before was. So he's talking about the parable. Maurice Nicoll is talking about the parable of the man who was cutting himself with stones, and he's saying the stones psychologically mean that he's cutting himself with the literal truth. So if you don't have your inner being developed where you can understand these teachings on a deep level within you, then you can take them in a certain way. Oh, look, there's stones right there, and cut yourself with these stones and really wreck your life. I've seen that a lot as a psychologist with other things that people learn from their childhood. You know, they're really sensitive souls, let's say, and their parents teach them a literal understanding and they don't have poetry with them. Their parents don't, or this artistic, sensitive side, and then the kids just sort of get wrecked in a lot of ways by that. I mean, we can all recover, so that's the good news. But okay, so this higher truth literally and was taken and was therefore unclean. And his uncleanness, we're going back to the parable, had to pass into the swine. But perhaps we shall be able to understand something more of what this means later on. Jesus always represents the non-literal, non-ritualistic understanding of higher truth. The Jews in the Gospels represent not actual literal people, according to Nicoll, but, I read other mystics that say, for sure, there were different sects, sects, of Judaism, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, different groups who interpreted the Torah and the prophets in different ways. But a certain literal level of taking everything belonging to higher truth. Everyone is a Jew who cannot get from the sense of the letter to the psychological meaning. He's talking about the way it's presented in the Gospels, the way as the psychological understanding. So the Jews are said to stone Christ when Christ said, I and the Father are one. It is said that the Jews took up stones again to stone him, because their literal minds thought his words were blasphemy. The inner meaning is that people, on the level of literal and so ritualistic external understanding, throw this meaning at people who stand above its level. One can even be stoned by what one once understood in a literal way and now understands quite differently. So you can understand something in a literal way and then come to a new understanding, like when Christ said, there must be new wineskins in order to hold the new wine, lest the old wineskins will burst. Old wineskins can't hold new wine. There's a certain transformation in you that has to occur. So if, let's say someone gets married, and 15 years later, if they haven't grown in their capacity to love that person and the depth of their love, it's like you couldn't explain to the person 15 years before the kind of love that would be developed after 15 years of loving. And you can't put that 15 years experience in someone who just got there. It's kind of like that. I'll just let that sit for a little bit. But I and the Father are one, as is said. The Jews took up stones again to stone him because their literal minds thought his words were blasphemy. Okay, so one can even be stoned by what one once understood in a literal way and now understands quite differently. And one can always stone a man through his actual literal words without allowing any existence to what he really meant. And literal law of the legal courts is and must be based on stone, that is, on what you actually said in words and not on what you meant. Here's part 5. This is still in chapter 1. Let us speak for a moment about wine used as an image for truth. We shall study the meaning of esoteric truth when it has reached the stage of wine in a man's understanding later. But at present, we must understand that stone is the literal form of esoteric truth, and water refers to another way of understanding the same truth, and wine to the highest form of understanding it. In the miracle recorded in the 2nd chapter of St. John's Gospel, Christ turned water into wine. In this account, it is said that he asked the servants to fill the stone jars with water, and then he transformed the water into wine. That is, 3 stages of a man's relation to truth are shown. And this means, of course, 3 stages in the understanding of esoteric truth. The idea of wine leads naturally to the idea of vineyards, which produce wine. Before we can continue more fully the study of the ancient language of parables, we must look at the meaning of vineyards and try to get some idea of their significance. It will be necessary to speak further of this truth that refers to a man's inner development and growth of understanding. This truth is not ordinary truth. It is sown on the earth. For example, Christ taught this particular kind of truth. In the Sermon on the Mount, he spoke quite openly about certain aspects of it, but the deeper aspects of it he concealed under the guise of parables. Man cannot invent this truth for himself. We have seen that this is indicated in the story of the Tower of Babel, where men thought that they could reach heaven by means of brick and slime, instead of stone and mortar. Higher truth, which simply means truth that leads to a higher level of self-evolution, does not arise in life, but comes from those who have already reached this higher level. Many have reached it. Some few of them are recorded in ordinary history. Let us confine ourselves to Christ. He taught this higher truth, but he spoke many things about the establishment of the special order of truth on the earth and used the image of the vineyard. A school of teaching based on truth of this order was called by him a vineyard. Well, this is one way of calling the vineyard. The vineyard has many mystical reasons. levels as well. One vineyard you could call a school of thought, and people learn different schools of thought in order to get to this higher truth. But a vineyard is also, if Christ says, I am the vine, you are the branches, he who remains in me, this is this Greek word, but just you stay, abide in Christ, then all this fruit will grow out of you. And the truth, the Holy Spirit can reveal in you as well. So there's a teaching within each one of us that can be experienced and known and conveyed to others. Anyway, so he taught this higher truth, but he spoke many things about the establishment of this special order of truth on earth and used the image of a vineyard. A school of teaching based on truth of this order was called by him a vineyard, and its object was to produce fruit. If it did not, it was cut down. Christ also speaks of himself as a vine, and he says to his disciples, I am the vine, and ye are the branches, what I was just saying. He that abideth in me remains in me, and I in him. The same beareth much fruit, for apart from me you can do nothing. Christ relates the following parable about a vineyard. A certain man had a fig tree, planted it in his vineyard. He came seeking fruit thereon, and found none. And he said unto the vinedresser, Behold, these 3 years I come seeking fruit on this fig tree, and find none. Cut it down. Why doth it also cumber the ground? And he answering saith unto him, Lord, let it alone this year also, till I shall dig about it, and dung it, and if it bear fruit thenceforth, well. But if not, you shall cut it down. That's in Luke. From this point of view, man was regarded as capable of a special growth, a special inner development, and vineyards were established to make this development possible. Of course, they were not actual vineyards. They were schools of teaching. But what did they teach? They taught, first of all, knowledge that could lead, if practiced, to the higher level of development inherent in man. What they taught a man was that he was an individual that is unique, who could reach this higher state of himself, and that this was his real meaning, and that this only could satisfy him most deeply. They began with teaching this truth, or knowledge of this special truth, but they led to something else. They led from truth to a definite state of a man where he acted no longer from the truth that brought him up to this level, but from the level itself. This was sometimes called the good. All truth must lead to some good state as its goal. This was the idea belonging to the term vineyard. Wine was produced. A man began to act from good and not truth, and thus becoming a new man. I think that's the end of chapter 1. Yeah. It gets a lot more specific and deeper. This was just like, him laying out the groundwork for understanding that there are deeper meanings in these words, and that we can, I have my hat. I was just jogging on the way down here. That we can have interchange. If you look at the Desert Fathers, you see that they talked about theosis, which is like us being transformed into like a God state. And Jesus quoted, like the Psalms say, ye are gods. I won't get into all of that theology. I want to just bring up questions about inner transformation and how we can get to that, and how these ideas can wake up in us, so that when Christ says, let the dead bury the dead, we can just let that happen and not be dead ourselves, and learn what does it mean to not be dead, to not just come to a higher understanding in our minds, but be transformed from the stone into the water, into the wine, into this vineyard, from the seed. And we're not just a grape that goes around. We are the seed inside the grape, the soul inside the seed. All right, we'll see where this goes. I wish you love.